an election a year ago. If members on the other side want to implement their race equality strategy, they should go ahead and win an election, win the support of the British people, and then they can have their way. But at the moment, this is a Conservative government, and we are going to do this in the way that we believe the people of this country want. I'm afraid I'm not giving way. I've only got 3 minutes, and I have more than 3 minutes of context, of content. Mr. Speaker, in her speech, the member for Brent Central says she hoped I'd learn something from her. Now it's time for me to give her a couple of lessons too, although I don't believe she's in her place. She said in her speech, we need to look at history and we need to improve it. Lesson number 1, you cannot improve history, you can only learn from it. What we can improve is the future, and that is what this government has been doing over the last 10 years. I won't reel out statistics in the interest of time. Other members on this side of the House have already done so. Lesson number 2. Black history is not the history of institutional racism. Listening to some members across the House, it's quite clear that they don't know the difference. It is not true, as the member for Liverpool Riverside said, that African history was interrupted by slavery. Also shows an ignorance of geography, because West African history is different from African history. As probably the only member of this House who actually grew up and went to school in Africa, I can tell you that's not what we're taught. Much more is taught about the history of black slave traders who existed before and after the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, the most notable statue in the city of Lagos, where I grew up, is that of Madam Tinubu. It's the biggest one. It's now equivalent to Trafalgar Square. She was a slave trader, but she was also a freedom fighter and a much-loved icon. Her slave trading is not celebrated, but her fight against colonizers is. In Nigeria, she's recognized as a complex character, as all historical figures are, and heaven help anyone who would try to pull her statue down. There is much that we can learn from Nigeria about how to handle the issue of statues. But why does this issue mean so much to me, Mr. Speaker? It's not just because I'm a first-generation immigrant. It's because my daughter came home from school this month and said to me, we're learning Black History Month because every other month is about white history. This is wrong, and this is not what our children should be picking up. These are not the values I have taught her. They are instead yet another sign of the pernicious identity politics that looks at individuals primarily as groups of biological characteristics. People often don't realize when it has taken hold, and I know that many of them are well-meaning. But what I really want to finish with is the story of Tom Molyneux. He was a black boxer who freed himself from slavery in the US, and he moved to England in 1809. I would have said so much more, but I'm out of time, Mr. Speaker. But what his story tells us is that this is a country that welcomes people, and that black people from all over the world have found this to be a great and welcoming country. These are the values as a black woman I'm teaching my black daughter. We must never take it for granted. And this Black History Month, let us celebrate the black talent we are blessed with, the progress we have made in accepting one another, and the contribution black people have made in making us who we are as a nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Backbench Committee again and all members of this House for contributing to this debate. This has been a very engaging debate, and I hope this continues. I want to also thank members of the public that responded to my call in terms of what I should discuss at this debate. I've met so many people that have been engaged. I also want to thank members of the public for recommending trailblazers for me to mention in this House today. I'm sorry if I wasn't able to mention everyone. There are just so many trailblazers out there, and we just need to learn all about them. I also want to say that I want to emphasise again that we really do need to have a race equality strategy and an action plan. And second, to diversify the curriculum. We must listen to members of the public. So many people have signed that petition asking us to diversify the curriculum. This is not about political point scoring. This is about listening to members of the public about what their needs are and looking at the stats that have been put out there. There's been loads of research that have been poured out by teachers asking for the curriculum to be diversified. I also want to say this is not also about identity politics. This is about understanding the true history of our nation in the UK, because we can only move forward if we learn the good, the ugly side of the politics. This isn't about glossing politics and making it pretty. This is not about attacking white people or attacking anyone because of their politics. This is about learning our true history, because it's absolutely important that we understand that to be able to move forward in progress.
Order, order. I'm going to put the question because I think it's right the House should put the question, but I technically should have done it. So I'm going to still put it. The question is, as on the order paper, as many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those passive in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes. Order. Order, order. Before the Secretary of State for Health Social Care addresses the Chamber, could I just point out that British Sign Language interpretation of the statement is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. I now call the Secretary of State, Matt Hancock, to make a statement. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I'd like to make a statement on coronavirus. The virus remains a perilous threat. Yesterday, Europe recorded its 7 millionth coronavirus case. Deaths in Germany and Italy have doubled in 7 days. And here, today's ONS statistics show that weekly deaths linked to coronavirus have risen to their highest level since the start of July. Cases among the over 60s continue to rise. And as Deputy Chief Medical Officer Jonathan Van Tam made clear earlier, it is the penetration of coronavirus into older age groups which gives the NHS the greatest cause for concern. So we must act where the virus is spreading. In the parts of the country where it's spreading the fastest, it is our sombre duty to take action necessary to protect people's lives and protect the NHS. Mr. Speaker, coronavirus is not a short-term problem that can easily be fixed. It requires difficult decisions in these difficult times. Our goal is to get life back to as normal as possible, support the NHS, keep children at school, and shelter the economy as much as possible, and do this by suppressing the virus until a vaccine is available. It's been clear for some days now that further action is needed across parts of England. Last Monday, we were able to reach an agreement with the leadership of Liverpool City Region across party lines to take the action that's needed, with a package of financial support and cooperation. Yesterday, I announced to the House a similar agreement reached in Lancashire. In Lancashire, Liverpool and across the country, we continue to work closely with local leadership. Mr. Speaker, in Greater Manchester, there have been more coronavirus infections already in October than in July, August and September combined. The average daily hospital admissions in Greater Manchester are now higher than they were on the 26th of March. And there are now more COVID-19 patients in Greater Manchester hospitals than in the whole of the South West and South East combined. As a result, we need to take further action to protect lives and livelihoods in Greater Manchester. So, informed by this data, we've made the difficult decision to place Greater Manchester into the very high local COVID alert level, coming into force at 1 minute past midnight on Friday. This means that pubs and bars must close unless they're serving substantial meals. Households cannot mix indoors or in most outdoor settings. In some public outdoor spaces, groups must be limited to the rule of 6, and we strongly advise against travel into and out of the area. In line with the extra measures taken in Lancashire, casinos, bingo halls, betting shops, adult gaming centres and soft play areas must also close. Now, I know that these restrictions are tough, and so we're putting in place a comprehensive package of support. This includes the Job Support Scheme, which ensures those affected by business closures are still paid. Once topped up with universal credit, those on low incomes will receive at least 70% of their normal income. 80%, of their normal income. We've also made available up to £465 million to help local authorities implement and enforce restrictions. Greater Manchester will receive £22 million of this. And we will also work with local authorities to allocate testing and introduce local contact tracing. Over the last 10 days, we've sought to reach an agreement with local leaders. And unfortunately, we were not able to reach an agreement in Greater Manchester as we have previously in Lancashire and the Liverpool City region. As well as the support that I've outlined, we've made a generous and extensive offer to support Manchester's businesses. This offer was proportionate to the support that we've given the Liverpool City region and Lancashire, but regrettably, the Mayor rejected it. Of course, we do not want businesses in Greater Manchester to be disadvantaged, so that offer remains on the table. Our door is open to further discussions with local leaders in the coming days about business support. Mr. Speaker, I understand the impact of these measures, but we must take the decisions to save lives and ultimately livelihoods in Greater Manchester. And to everyone in Greater Manchester, I say this: throughout these difficult times for your great city, we will be by your side. And the best thing all of us can do now to protect our loved ones and to get back to normal as fast as possible is for everyone to come together, to follow these new rules, and for all to play their part in tackling this deadly virus. Mr. Speaker, the path through a pandemic is never straightforward. It requires all of us to make difficult decisions and tough sacrifices and to get the virus under control. I know that these local restrictions are hard and they're another sacrifice in a year full of sacrifices. But we must not waver now. We must persevere as we work so hard on the long-term solutions that will see us through and come together once again so we can look after the people and the communities that we love. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Jonathan Ashworth.
Well, as always, I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement, but I'm afraid that tonight, people across Manchester and the boroughs of Greater Manchester and towns like Stockport and Leigh and Bury, where I grew up, will be watching the news in disbelief, and they will be worried if they are affected by these closures. And they will be asking, why was it right to cover 80% of wages in March and then now, in the run-up to Christmas, cover just 2/3 of their wages in October? What happened to that Chancellor who plastered across social media soft-focused selfies of himself, boasting that he would support jobs and incomes and do whatever it takes? Because tonight, that Chancellor is forcing people on the national minimum wage to live on just £5.76 an hour, from whatever it takes to now taking from the lowest paid. How does he expect families to pay the bills, to pay the rent, to put food on the table, to pay for the school lunches, when 1/3 of their income has been snatched away literally overnight? And where is the Chancellor? He should be here to defend the consequences of his decisions that will mean a winter of hardship across the north. Now, I grew up in Greater Manchester. My dad worked in casinos in Salford. My mum worked in bars in Manchester. I know that across Manchester, people will want to do the right thing, but they won't be able to if 1/3 of their income is stripped away. Now, the leaders of Greater Manchester were prepared to compromise. They offered to settle for £65 million to support jobs and livelihoods. The government insisted on £60 million. But rather than finding the £5 million extra, the Prime Minister pulled the plug on negotiations and then this afternoon took £38 million off the table. What a petty, vindictive, callous response in a national crisis, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister may think he's punishing the politicians. In fact, he's punishing the people of Greater Manchester, Mr. Speaker. And this is the Prime Minister who has blown £150 million on face masks that weren't suitable for frontline NHS staff. He's blown £130 million on testing kits that turned out to be unsafe and had to be recalled. And he's spending £7,000 a day on consultants as part of his failing £12 billion test and trace programme. Now, given test and trace is broken and the virus is out of control, I've always accepted that greater containment measures are needed. But for measures to be effective, they need to command the consent of the people impacted. And people need to know how long these measures will last. The Secretary of State didn't tell us in his statement just now. And yet these restrictions also have been called into question by the Chief Medical Officer, who said they won't be enough. And these are restrictions that the Prime Minister admitted last week gives us only, in his words, a chance to bring the national R down. So how will the sacrifices the Prime Minister is forcing upon the people in the north bring down infection rates in the south? Because he knows to bring R below 1, further measures will be needed. He knows more areas are likely to go into Tier 3. This is about so much more than Greater Manchester. But people will watch tonight and say if a government is prepared to inflict this level of harm on its people in the middle of a pandemic in one part of the country, then they will be prepared to do it to people in all parts of the country as well. And the result will be a winter of hardship for millions of people. This isn't a game, it's about people's lives. People need proper financial support. This is a national crisis and we won't defeat this virus on the cheap.
Secretary of State.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I regret that the honourable member, who so often is so reasonable, is choosing to play political games with political rhetoric tonight. As I said in my statement, the offer of the support is on the table. And to the people of Greater Manchester, I say that the offer of the same support that was agreed with the Labour leadership of the Liverpool City region, and I commend them for their work, and was agreed with the leadership of Lancashire, and I commend them for their work, the same offer is on the table and remains on the table. And I look forward in the coming days to working with the local councils right across Greater Manchester, and of course the Mayor, if he's willing to come back to the table, to make sure that we have that package of support for businesses in place. But crucially, it is incumbent on us all to send the same public health messages to our constituents wherever we represent around the country, but in particular in the areas where cases are rising, as in Greater Manchester, to make sure that we are clear about the part everybody needs to play to keep this virus under control. And it is that sort of public health messaging, rather than political games, that I think the public is looking for in these difficult times.
Under the House, Peter Bottomley.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's fair to say the opposition leader has been moderate. He hasn't repeated his party leader's call for a national lockdown, and people in the areas where the virus has not jumped up very high will be grateful for that. My father's family came from Greater Manchester. Were they there now, I think they'd ask that the Mayor should actually make an agreement with the government, because public health and public health go together. And if it is a proportionate offer, we haven't heard the reason why it's inadequate in one place. If we want to have employment in the future, we need to have employers, and getting help to those who need to keep their businesses going, struggling to keep their businesses going, that help is going to be needed. Can I just make one point to my right honourable friend? Down in Worthing, we're not getting our test results back all the time very fast. It's important we do. So, for example, a child may have symptoms, a father or mother may not be able to go to work as a teacher, and you end up by penalising all the children in a class, and I hope my right honourable friend will be able to say what's happening.
Well, I strongly agree with my honourable friend, who puts it very clearly that the people of Greater Manchester would expect their local leaders to come to the table, and that offer remains there. It remains there for the support for local businesses, alongside the support for strengthening test and trace and strengthening enforcement in Greater Manchester. And I would urge all of the leaders of the 9 boroughs of Greater Manchester to pick up the phone and to work with us to make sure that we can deliver this. And of course that offer remains open for the Mayor if he wants to return to the table. On the point about the testing in Worthing, I will absolutely look into whether there was a specific problem. The test turnaround times have come down as the capacity has rapidly expanded, and I will make sure that I get back to my right honourable friend as soon as possible.
Let's head to Scotland to the SNP spokesperson, Dr. Philippa Whitford. Dr. Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. While there may be a small minority who do not think of those around them, the majority of people try to follow the advice to reduce the spread of COVID. We know the virus spreads where people are in close contact. This isn't just pubs and nightclubs, but includes those in overcrowded housing or those who are working in exposed jobs where working from home isn't an option, or those on 0 hours contracts where if they aren't working, they simply won't get paid. Does the Secretary of State not think it's a bit inappropriate for politicians with well-paid and secure jobs to suggest that rising COVID cases in certain areas are just due to some form of misbehaviour requiring tougher penalties? People want to do the right thing, whether due to restrictions or because they are infected themselves, but sometimes they feel they've no option but to continue going out of the house. While in general surveys, the vast majority of people say they would isolate if they caught COVID, a study from King's College London shows that less than 20% of those who actually develop symptoms go on to isolate. This was associated with financial hardship, social deprivation, having dependent children, and working in key jobs which can't be carried out from home. Why is the Chancellor not continuing the full furlough scheme when we are heading into a second wave and the hardest winter the NHS will ever have faced? There are still millions of people who've not received any support since March. Does the Secretary of State not recognise that for those on low wages and in insecure work, the choice between staying at home or feeding their family just doesn't feel like a choice at all?
Mr. Speaker, I agree with the Honourable Lady that the majority of people try to follow the advice, and the vast majority of people want to do the right thing. And we introduced the £500 payment for those on low incomes precisely to support people to do that. We introduced it right across the UK, working with the Scottish Government. And there are signs that the uptake of that has allowed people to complete isolation when they need to in order to keep others safe.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend and his department has engaged with me and my Tees Valley colleagues a number of times in recent weeks, and I thank him for that. He is well aware of my deep reservations about further restrictions on my constituents' lives, liberties and livelihoods, particularly due to the mental health impact that these restrictions present. Can he confirm that while discussions are ongoing, there are no current plans to move Redcar and Cleveland into Tier 3 restrictions? And will he also commit to working with me, Redcar and Cleveland Council, my Tees Valley colleagues and the Tees Valley Mayor Ben Houchin on any future changes we make?
Yes, we've been working very closely with the Tees Valley, and the need for the level 2 restrictions there was not something that we put into place lightly, but we followed the data, and we will continue to follow the data and take the action that's needed, but only the action that's needed, and engage absolutely with my honourable friend, the Mayor of the Tees Valley, who is rising above party politics to do the right thing for the Tees Valley. The point that I would make to him, though, in addition to the points that he made, is that the impact, for instance, on mental health is undoubtedly worse if the virus gets out of control, even though the measures that are taken are difficult ones. And the Royal College of Psychiatry has been very clear that the best thing for mental health is for us to keep the virus under control, even though, of course, we need to mitigate the consequences that do and do flow from the measures that we sometimes have to take.
Matt Fadden.
Today marks a low point in the handling of this situation, where instead of uniting people behind its approach, the government has imposed its decision, leaving a bitter taste. And there are other decisions still to come, and other regions who are watching what has happened today, including my own in the West Midlands. So can the Secretary of State assure the House that as significant economic support is withdrawn at the end of this month, any decision on whether or not national restrictions are required will not be taken because it's cheaper and a means of avoiding adequate support for businesses and workers concerned? Because if that is the case, then the public health measures and the economic measures will be pulling in two different directions.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And the extra support that we put into areas that go into Tier 3 is a reflection of the need to ensure that that support is there when action has to be taken for public health reasons in order to control the virus. I spoke to the Mayor of the West Midlands just before coming into this chamber, and we will work very closely together to make sure that we keep the virus under control in the West Midlands, where in a very large part the local leadership, again across party lines, has worked very closely together to do what is right for the people of the West Midlands.
Today, Jonathan Van Tam, in answer to a question, said that a national lockdown right now would be inappropriate for places such as East Anglia. Does my right honourable friend therefore disagree with the position of the Labour Party and Ipswich Labour that now is the time to close down the entire hospitality sector in somewhere like Ipswich with low levels of COVID but which employs thousands of my constituents?
Well, I don't think that we should... I do agree, of course, with what Professor Jonathan Van Tam said, and he is a very fine scientist and a brilliant man. And I think that I think that nobody is looking right now for political differences, for politics sense. What people are looking for is people to come together and make the right decisions in the national interest or in the local interest, and to take these decisions as locally as possible to make sure that we support people as much as possible, take action where it is necessary, but make sure that we don't take action where it isn't necessary.
Liz Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister earlier said he was still talking to the North East. Can I reiterate that in the North East, we believe that we should remain in Tier 2 and are working hard to that end. What we do need is financial support for the test and trace work already being carried out effectively locally, and financial support for our hospitality, leisure and retail sectors who are taking the strain of current restrictions. So will he now fund the test and trace work being done so effectively locally, and will he urge the Chancellor to provide a financial support package for our hospitality, leisure and retail sector within Tier 2 to support our economy and our local people?
We are working very closely with the local leadership in the North East and with colleagues. It was very good to see the Honourable Lady on a Zoom call recently to discuss this. I think that it is important that we take the action if it is necessary, but there are early signs that the number of cases in the North East is starting to flatten. In the first instance, that is happening amongst younger people, and I'm still worried about the numbers of cases of over 60s, who of course the people who are most likely to end up in hospital or worse. So we will keep a very close eye on the situation, but we have no imminent plans to make a change. And were the clinical advice to change that we needed to move urgently, then of course we would seek to do that with the support of the local area.
We now come to Sarah Brickley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the past 4 weeks, the number of COVID patients admitted to intensive care units in the hospitals in some parts of the country has increased sevenfold, and I agree with my right honourable friend that we must act now to control the spread of the virus. But can he assure me that the government is doing all that it can to keep cancer treatments, elective surgeries and other vital diagnostic services going?
I absolutely can give my honourable friend that assurance, and I had a meeting on this with the NHS only this week. The good news is that the backlog from the initial lockdown has been reduced by 63% of the very long waiters for cancer treatment, those waiting over 104 days. We're working to keep that coming down. Of course, the best way we can make cancer treatment available to everyone, and the best thing in terms of cancer treatment is to keep the rate of coronavirus down. And on the point of fairness, representing a Lancashire seat as she does, I think it's really important that the proposals that we're making in Greater Manchester, the subject of the statement this evening, are equivalent to the proposals that were made for Lancashire, and it is only fair between different geographies that we have the same levels of support, especially neighbouring geographies like Hyndburn and Manchester.
Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I too am working hard with Tees Valley colleagues to keep the area out of Tier 3, but my constituents in Hartlepool are confused and seething with anger. They're concerned about moving to Tier 3 with all the health and economic impacts that will bring. We're not in Tier 3 yet, but if we get there, what exit strategy does he have for ending lockdown?
In the short term, the best exit strategy for anywhere that does go into Tier 3, and I agree with him on his assessment that that Hartlepool in Tier 2 at the moment, I hope we can keep it there, but we'll keep it under review. The best exit strategy for anywhere that wants to go into a lower tier is for everybody to follow those rules, respect social distancing, and try to get the case rate coming down. But of course, for the whole nation, indeed for the whole world, the best exit strategy is a combination of mass testing and a vaccine, and we're working incredibly hard to deliver both as quickly as feasibly possible. We need a long-term solution to COVID, as well as the short-term action that we're having to take.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Greater Manchester has lived under harsh additional restrictions for 3 months. Can I put it to my right honourable friend, the lockdowns themselves cost lives as well as livelihoods, that they have a terrible toll on the mental health, particularly of the young. Does he accept that it is better to do these things, if they must be done, by consent? And in that regard, will he confirm that these measures will be brought to this House for approval, and that in any case they will end with the sunset after 28 days?
Yes, I do. I do agree with him that these things are better done by consent. And in the parts of the country where the whole local area has supported the measures through getting the right messages out to people about their personal responsibility, you do tend to get a better response and see the case rate starting to come down. It's one of the many reasons why we worked so hard to try to get an agreement across Greater Manchester, and one of the reasons why I regret that we haven't been able to, although, as I say, that our door remains open. On the point about consent, of course these measures will be brought to the House, and they sunset after 28 days, and we keep them under review because we wouldn't want to keep these measures in place a moment longer than they're needed.
Geraldine.
Mr. Speaker, Secretary of State, none of us doubts the grave threat to public health and the difficulty in dealing with it. But there is also now a widespread real threat of poverty. So whether the 60 million is on the table or off the table is actually immaterial. It's not what the elected representatives of Greater Manchester said they need. So does the Secretary of State appreciate, does his government appreciate that the people of Greater Manchester tonight feel that they have been abandoned by this government, and that my constituents in Edinburgh West and people up and down this country will be wondering if they will be abandoned next?
No, on the contrary, we're putting extra support into Greater Manchester, and we are willing to continue with the support, or akin to the support that we agreed with the leadership of Liverpool City Region and with Lancashire's, my honourable friend who's now gone from the chamber, was setting out. This unprecedented level of support across the whole of this pandemic has only been possible because of the UK acting together and working together. I hope that we can continue to work with her and her party to make sure that we get through this as best we possibly can, suppressing the virus and supporting jobs in the NHS.
John Redwood.
More action is needed to help livelihoods and save incomes. So will the government share and, if necessary, develop its work with the commercial and public sectors over how air conditioning systems, ventilation systems, heating systems, air extraction systems can be adapted or improved so that more of those commercial and public buildings can be kept open for proper use?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's an incredibly important strand of the work. It's being led by the business department, but I keep a close eye on it and in fact had an update on it this week, which I'd be very happy to discuss with my right honourable friend.
Speaker, and I thank the Minister, the Secretary of State for all that he's doing. There's many underlying conditions, health conditions. One of those is respiratory illnesses. I declare an interest, Mr. Speaker, as the chair of the APPG in respiratory health. And given that respiratory illnesses are one of the leading cause of deaths in the UK, and that includes COVID-19, of course, what reassurances can the Secretary of State offer me and those people who suffer from it, that referrals for severe asthma, COPD and other respiratory illnesses will not be forgotten and will be maintained, and that avoid further unnecessary deaths?
Well, we work very hard on this point, and actually to answer both this question and a question from my right honourable friend from Trafford, which I didn't answer. Of course we take into account the health impacts, the overall health impacts, both of COVID, direct COVID deaths, the impact of COVID on our hospitals, meaning that it's harder sometimes to treat other illnesses, although that is now much better than it was in the first wave, and the NHS is very much open, and also the impact of measures on other conditions. The best way through this from a health point of view, taking all these things into account, is undoubtedly to keep the virus down, but also to try to make sure that the NHS right across all 4 nations of the UK is open for all other conditions, and that if you are asked to go to hospital, then it is the safest place for you to go.
Speaker, I understand talks are currently ongoing about South Yorkshire, which includes Rother Valley, going to stricter lockdown. But before any decision is made, will he agree to get agreement between councils and local MPs so that local views, concerns and support is agreed in advance, especially around mental health and local businesses?
Yes, I'd be very happy to agree with my honourable friend. In fact, we were discussing this on Sunday morning on the challenges in South Yorkshire, where the cases are going up fast, action does need to be taken, and talks are ongoing in a highly collegiate and constructive way. I pay tribute to the way that my honourable friend stands up for his constituents in the Rother Valley and makes the case directly to ministers day after day about what's best for the area and represents them so clearly.
Let's head to Wales with Geraint Davies. Geraint Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in lockdown, people need the financial support to do the right thing, to stop the virus and stay at home. So in Wales, where we're in national lockdown, the Labour government has provided £300 million. That's £100 per person to help them stay at home to beat the virus. But in Manchester, the Prime Minister has provided £22 million. That's £8 per person instead of £100 per person in Wales. How can this be right? And will he and the Chancellor ensure that wherever you live across the United Kingdom, people have enough money to stay at home to beat the virus without inflicting massive poverty?
Well, of course, we've put in substantially more funding to not just to Greater Manchester, but the UK government is putting substantial funding into Wales that goes directly to businesses that are affected and have to close, that goes directly to individuals, both through the furlough scheme and the job support scheme, and of course universal credit, which is available to all those who lose their jobs and people in low paid work. So in addition to the funding that it remains on the table, and I urge the local leadership in Greater Manchester to come back to the table, there is a very widespread support available.
Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Warrington finds itself as a Tier 2 island in the northwest now, parked between Manchester and Liverpool. Our infection rate remains stubbornly high, though, and admissions to Warrington Hospital have now exceeded the peak of the first wave in April. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that any further measures for Warrington should protect the NHS, should save lives, but also support local livelihoods and the economy?
Yes, I absolutely agree with the approach my honourable friends set out. I am worried about the number of cases in Warrington. I'm worried about the impact on Warrington Hospital, which is an excellent hospital. Of course, Warrington isn't an island because Cheshire as a whole has seen case rates rise. So it is an area that we're worried about, and we're working with the local leadership to make sure that we take the appropriate measures and put in place the support that's needed.
Let's head up to Manchester with Afzal Khan. Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is impossible to describe today's events without using unparliamentary language. But out of deference to you, I will settle for a complete shambles. Today, this government made a choice not to protect the poorest people in Greater Manchester through the punishing reality of the winter to come. Does the Secretary of State really believe that we will get through this pandemic by subjecting communities to punishing financial negotiations? Does the government truly value pennies more than lives? The governments are playing poker with the people's jobs, their homes, and their lives. So can the Secretary of State tell me, is he proud to be a member of this government?
Mr. Speaker, on the contrary to the way that the honourable gentleman described it, the government has put forward the same proposals in Greater Manchester as was agreed in Lancashire, as was agreed in Liverpool, and unfortunately the Mayor of Greater Manchester walked away from the table, but the offer is there, and I'd urge all of the local leaders, including the honourable gentleman, to take forward the offer that's there to resolve this, and for us all to work together for the benefit of the people of Manchester.
Jackie Doyle-Price.
Friend has told the House that these measures are as much about the increase in infection amongst the over 60s, who are obviously more vulnerable to this dreadful disease. We're going to ask him what assessment he's made of whether that infection is being spread in the community as opposed to care settings, and if it is in the community, what messages we should be giving to the rest of the community to protect their loved ones, and how they should be making sure they do that.
I think it's a duty on all of us to send messages to the communities who we serve that people need to take a personal responsibility to try to reduce the spread of this virus. Now, there have been some cases in care homes recently, but far fewer, and it seems that the actions that we've taken and the very hard work of the care home sector over the summer and the staff who work in care homes is reducing the transmission. But naturally, the staff who work in care homes, and most care homes there are more staff than residents, they themselves of course live in the community, and so it is almost impossible to stop any infection getting into all care homes when the level of infection in the community rises. Having said that, the core of this second peak is in the community, and it is in the community where every single one of us can act to take more responsibility to help slow the spread of the virus.
Alfie?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents, like everyone else's, have suffered huge anxiety over the last 6 months, worried about their health, worried about their livelihoods. And the chaos that has unfolded today in relation to Greater Manchester will have done nothing to allay their fears. But they're also angry. They're angry about the money that has been squandered on the PPE purchases, on the consultants, on the failing test and trace system that my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, raised with the Minister. The Secretary of State didn't answer his questions then. Will he answer them now? Why is Manchester not entitled to the money that it needs to get by through this crisis when so much money is being wasted elsewhere?
Well, the money that we are proposing and put on the table for Greater Manchester is exactly the same as the amount that was agreed with the leadership of Liverpool and of Lancashire, and is the support there to help people through what she's quite right to say are very difficult times. And so I hope that we can resolve this, but we needed to act after 10 days with the infections still going up. We needed to act, and it was our duty to act, even though we couldn't yet get the agreement of the local leaders, but I hope that that will come.
20 is withdrawn, so we go up to Scotland with Richard Thompson. Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the ways that we can hope to pick a path out of this crisis is through improved testing and faster testing. Now, the Health Secretary and the Prime Minister have spoken in past days of new testing technologies being piloted with NHS staff. If this technology is found to be effective, what is his timeline for rolling this testing out to wider groups? And will these tests contribute to the 500,000 daily tests that the government says it will be conducting by the end of the month?
The answer is, Mr. Speaker, yes. And yes, they'll be there to benefit everybody across the whole United Kingdom.
Mary Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, and I was hugely disappointed that the Mayor of Greater Manchester has failed to reach an agreement with the government, thus compounding the uncertainty facing my Cheadle constituents. We need to find a way forward. My right honourable friend will know that I've consistently advocated on behalf of Stockport Council and for my constituents in Cheadle, referring to testing and tracing and COVID compliance in the hospitality sector, and pressed for a borough-by-borough approach that reflects our lower case rate. I've tonight written to the leader of Stockport Council, urging her to act on behalf of my Cheadle constituents and work with the government to negotiate a local authority-specific financial package which supports and protects Cheadle residents and businesses. As we consider the next steps, will the Minister continue to work with me and our local leaders to secure a fair deal for our area?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady puts the case very clearly, and she's right. We don't want businesses in Stockport to be disadvantaged, and so an offer proportionate to the support that we put into Liverpool and Lancashire is on the table, and I will take away her proposal and talk to my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, who's engaged in these talks right now, and her suggestion of a borough-by-borough approach. We remain open to a GM-wide approach, but so far we haven't been able to get the agreement of the Mayor to the support that is there on the table for the businesses of Greater Manchester.
Kevin Jones.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Secretary of State's announcement that he has no plans to move the North East into Tier 3, and he's right. In County Durham, COVID numbers are plateauing, especially if you take out of the students. But could he address the point raised by my honourable friend, the member for Blaydon? When will he give the extra resources to local directors of public health to do local test and tracing And can I also ask him, when will local directors of public health get the timely information from National Test and Tracing so that in those cases they can actually chase them up? Because at the moment they're getting them up to 48 hours after the case. He's keen.
The questions were so good, Mr. Speaker. I was enthusiastic to answer them as quickly as possible. I'm a fan of fast turnaround times, and I hope that I can ensure that they get turned around. The data gets turned around even more quickly in County Durham. We clearly, when it comes to the case rate, yes, there have been good signs. I am still worried about the case rate amongst the over 60s, and the discussions with local leaders continue, but I absolutely take his points on board.
With 24 withdrawn, so we're straight across to Derek Twin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In view of the Secretary of State is in favour of fast turnaround times, can I ask him this? Given that Lancashire and now Manchester in Tier 3 will be able to keep their gyms open, can I specifically ask the Secretary of State, will he either use the government's powers or give the powers to local council leaders in Halton and Merseyside to reopen gyms in that area?
He's making an argument that the honourable member for Southport has also consistently made, and I'm willing to. Well, why don't we have a conversation about it and see whether we can make any progress?
Speaker, we know infection rates are at very different levels across the country. We know restrictions cause issues for sufferers from other health conditions than COVID and have a huge impact upon the economy. But closing pubs in Harrogate or Newquay will not make case levels fall in Manchester or Newcastle. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that a blanket national lockdown is wrong and local interventions are what we need now to tackle this crisis?
Yes, I wholeheartedly agree. The localised and regional approach is increasingly being taken up around the world. For instance, in France, indeed in Sweden, which has often been discussed in this House, has put in place a system very similar to ours for exactly the sorts of reasons you set out.
I bet.
Speaker, as the Secretary of State will know from the Zoom call that we had on Sunday morning, for which I thank him, the Mayor and leaders of the Sheffield City region are engaged with ministers and officials about a number of asks in order that move to a Tier 3 could be considered. Those asks are about extra help for businesses, those that aren't completely shut but have a substantial reduction in income, and more help beyond the £500 scheme for people who are asked to isolate. Could the Secretary of State correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed from his answers to previous questions that what he's saying is the offer made so far to Lancashire and Merseyside is the final offer that anyone else could expect to receive, and no one else will get any more, particularly in terms of revenue or resources, than has been offered to those areas. Is that true or not?
That's an overinterpretation of my comments, I'd say. The discussions with the local leadership in South Yorkshire have been very constructive, very positive, all focused on the health and the public health needs to get this virus under control in South Yorkshire, and then the support that needs to go alongside that. They're being led by my right honourable friend, the Community Secretary, and I wouldn't want to fetter the privacy in which those discussions have rightly taken place. And I think we should leave it to the local leaders and my right honourable friend to try to come to a conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am sure that the Secretary of State is as disappointed as I am that the Greater Manchester Mayor has been unable to reach agreement with the government today. Would he and other right honourable colleagues now commit to meet with myself, other Greater Manchester colleagues and council leaders in Greater Manchester in order to find a fair and workable agreement?
Yes, absolutely. The support, proportionate to the support that was made available to Lancashire, is on the table, and we're willing to meet anybody from Greater Manchester to help to make this happen. And it is best done as a team effort. The offer was there on the table. I, like him, regret that it wasn't taken forward, but I hope that both council leaders in Wigan, colleagues from across the House, and if he wants to, the Mayor will come back to the table and work together for the people of Greater Manchester.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Health Secretary's attempt to divide and rule the Mayor and the Members of Parliament in Manchester is absolutely transparent, and it's shameful that some of those colleagues across the way who have been working collectively should collapse like they appear to be doing today. But doesn't it say everything about this government that they should believe £7,000 a day is an adequate amount to pay consultants to work on his failing track and trace programme, but that £8 per head is more than enough for people in Manchester and right across the North and Midlands to go into this Tier 3 after the Tier 2 programme hasn't worked?
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, we're working hard across party lines and trying to rise above that sort of political attack to work for the benefit and the public interest of everybody in this country.
Tom Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Gedling, which does not have a large student population, there continues to be a worryingly high number of coronavirus cases, and it's concerning to hear that the general picture appears to be moving upwards on the population, particularly amongst the over 60s, where we know the risks are higher. Does my honourable friend agree with me that this demonstrates the importance of acting fast with targeted action that is available to help save lives?
Yes, I strongly agree, and I praise my honourable friend's leadership in his local community in making this case. The number of cases in Nottingham and increasingly across Nottinghamshire are worrying. Nottinghamshire went into level 2 last week, and talks are ongoing about what more might be needed. And I praise the people of Nottinghamshire for what they're doing to try to slow the spread of this virus. It may be that more needs to be done. We will be driven entirely by the data and working closely with the local authorities.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Secretary of State, Cheshire leaders, indeed the Warrington leader, has met with the department, written to the Prime Minister, asking for local resources for a local test, trace and isolate system, as well as a substantial financial package of £42 million to support our hospitality sector, which people have mirrored across the room. They've yet to have a reply. So, given the urgency of the situation, please do your utmost, make sure that reply goes to the leaders. Finally, as a Mancunian by birth, then I find the spitefulness from the Prime Minister disgraceful. Do the right thing by the people of Greater Manchester, Prime Minister.
Well, the Prime Minister is seeking precisely to do that, and he, like me, he very much hopes that the local leadership in Greater Manchester will do their bit. When it comes to Cheshire and indeed Warrington, as we talked about earlier, I am worried about the cases, and I'll make sure that the engagement that he and his council seek happens as soon as possible.
Centre Cheshireman, Amersham with Dame Cheryl Gillan. Dame Cheryl.
Mr. Speaker, can I commend the Secretary of State for his localised approach and the calm way in which he is dealing with some unwarranted attacks on both him and the Prime Minister. The Epilepsy Society is based in Chalfont St Peter in my constituency and provides specialist care to a number of vulnerable residents and has, according to one relative, worked wonders in keeping residents safe and secure. However, visits from relatives cannot take place as the incidences of COVID-19 grow, and the home is now locked down again. With 60-minute tests now available down the road at Heathrow Airport, could we not arrange for this type of testing for close relatives so they could visit their loved ones? It would make all the difference in the world to my constituents and many others in long-term care.
The answer is yes. We absolutely want to use this sort of testing as it becomes more widely available to do exactly the sort of thing that my right honourable friend sets out. Yes.
Let's head to Greater Manchester with Debbie Abrahams. Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just say, Mr. Speaker, how shocked I am in terms of some of the responses of their Health Secretary. All Andy Burnham and the leaders of the Greater Manchester local authorities have been trying to do is to ensure that their constituents, our constituents, are not plunged into poverty, into homelessness and worse. That's all they've been trying to do. So to describe it as in the way it has is really upsetting. But Mr. Speaker, international evidence shows that key requirements for local lockdowns to work are firstly, that you have a competent test, trace and isolate system. Secondly, that businesses and workers are supported by a financial package equivalent to existing incomes. And finally, that national government supports local leaders. So, Mr. Speaker, the government has failed to deliver any of those. So are they following the evidence or not?
We're working incredibly hard to support the action that's needed to suppress this virus whilst protecting the NHS and schools and supporting the economy as much as is possible. When it comes to the work in Greater Manchester, absolutely that is our goal, that is the work that we're doing, and I really hope that given that this that the support proportionate to that support already agreed in Lancashire and Liverpool is on the table, I hope that local leaders will work with us.
Desmond Swain.
What estimate has he made of the number of excess deaths above the long-term average in each of the last few weeks?
Well, we have thankfully seen that the number of excess deaths is around at the level of the long-term average. I want to keep it that way, and that's why we're taking the action that we are, so that this doesn't get out of hand like we saw in the first peak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a pattern here, isn't there? Whenever the government can't agree a deal, it's always somebody else's fault. In this case, Andy Burnham's fault for simply standing up for what Greater Manchester needs, not what we want, what we need. Now, maybe I'm also over-interpreting the Secretary of State's comments, but in his answer to my honourable friend from Sheffield South East, he suggested there might be different offers for different areas. Now, Greater Manchester was asking for a carefully costed package to meet our needs and our requirements. Why can't the government just give Greater Manchester what we need?
Well, the offer that was made to Greater Manchester was proportionate to the support that we've already given to and agreed with the local leadership in Liverpool and in Lancashire, and I regret that the Mayor rejected it. But we want to support businesses across Greater Manchester, and so we are open to further discussions with local leaders, including with the council leaders, as my honourable friend suggested, about business support, and I hope that we can make some progress.
36 withdrawn, so we'll go up to Kingston upon Hull with Dame Dinah Johnson. Dinah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Andy Burnham has said that on COVID-19, we need to carry the people with us, not crush their spirit. So does the Health Secretary think that he has carried the people of the North with the government as they watch bully boy tactics and punishment beatings being used against the legitimate concerns of local leaders from all parties to try and protect the livelihoods of the poorest and local businesses in Greater Manchester? And how does this bode for other areas such as the Humber, which may well need more help as they move into higher tiers?
Areas like South Yorkshire, like West Yorkshire, like the North East, like Nottinghamshire, that we're already in discussions with, those discussions right across the board are constructive, are positive, and are focused entirely on the well-being of the people locally. And I hope that I hope that in Hull cases stay relatively low and we don't have to go into a higher tier. There are no plans to do so at the moment, and I urge the people of Hull to keep following the rules and keep the coronavirus down in Hull. But what I would say is that in every other part of the country, we've had highly constructive talks that haven't involved this sort of party political point scoring, and I would urge that approach from everybody.
Anthony Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency of South Cambridgeshire, the latest figures show an infection rate of just 54 per 100,000, about half the national average and 1/10 the rate in Liverpool. So I think it's absolutely right the government isn't following a national lockdown, but is instead following the regional, local approach. But in those areas that do need to go to Tier 3, it's absolutely right the government gives additional financial support, but it's also right, surely, that the government treats them fairly and equally. And the government couldn't give greater support to one area, Greater Manchester, than to Liverpool or Lancashire, because then those local leaders that are refusing to take the action necessary to lock down the virus will be given greater financial rewards than those leaders that are taking the steps necessary.
This point about fairness is really important. Imagine how it would feel. Imagine how it would feel to be running a business or being somebody who lives in Liverpool when an agreement has been struck across party lines for the support that comes with the measures that are necessary. If then, after a very public disagreement, instead of the constructive work that we really, really hope on this side to achieve, if there, as a result, was a deal that was not proportionate and fair. Fairness is absolutely at the heart of what we're trying to achieve here, and that is why it is of course right that we have the extra offer of support continues to be on the table. We want to strike a fair deal, but we have to take these measures to keep people safe.
And in fairness, Secretary of State, if you could address me, would be also helpful. Not just your back. That's great. Naz Shah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In his statement, the Secretary of State has said to the people of Manchester, we will be by your side, and that his response requires for all of us to make tough sacrifice. I put it to him that that's not entirely true, is it? Because it's constituencies like mine of Bradford West that are making the real tough sacrifices with facing restrictions for nearly 3 months because of his and his government failings. Just so we are aware, will this government try to play poker with the people of Bradford and their financial support like it did with Manchester before putting it into the highest tier?
Very closely with Bradford, with the council in Bradford, and of course I'm very happy to talk to her about what might be necessary. It has been very difficult for Bradford these past few months. I absolutely appreciate that. Bradford has been, and certainly the city of Bradford that she represents, has been in measures for a long time and had extra restrictions. And I hope that we can bring the number of cases down so that we can release some of those restrictions, and that's best done working together.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the setting up of a second local national testing centre locally in Fenton Manor in my constituency. And I thank the City Council and health professionals for the work that they've been doing locally. Would my right honourable friend continue to support this excellent work and continue to grow the testing capacity?
Yes, 100%. I think my honourable friend makes a very good point that the extra testing capacity that we're seeing across the country doesn't happen by magic. It happens by the hard work of his constituents and others who are playing their part in the testing regime, Mr. Speaker.
Let's head up to Manchester with Barbara Keeley. Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the Secretary of State talks about fairness, but we've today found out that Greater Manchester is effectively getting a third of the level of financial support that the government gave to Lancashire. And I say to the Secretary of State, it's a failure that his government cannot negotiate a decent package of support with our Greater Manchester Mayor. Now, Andy Burnham has argued for that decent financial support for people who work in businesses that are going to be closed down by government restrictions and for resources for locally led test and trace. He was right to do that. I urge the Secretary of State to think again. This is too important a time in this pandemic to fail to work with the devolved local government system that his government created.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's time to put aside short-term political point scoring, and the deal on the table that the Mayor of Greater Manchester walked away from was a fair deal that had been agreed, proportionate to the deal that had been agreed with leaders in Liverpool and in Lancashire. And I know I keep repeating this point, but it is absolutely at the centre of what it is to be fair, which is about treating people in similar situations in a similar way. And I think that the British people understand that, and hence We enter into these local discussions in good faith, and everywhere else they've been engaged in good faith, and I hope that's the way that they can continue, and I hope that's how they can continue in Greater Manchester in the future, Mr. Speaker.
William Wright. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to be fair to my right honourable friend who is motivated at all times by the best of intentions. But I do gently say this, that those of us who have a contrary view to all of the government's policies are not in immediate tow with the Mayor of Greater Manchester, nor are we in tow with the Labour opposition. I feel a deep sense of disappointment at this collective failure that we have seen today, and quite frankly, my constituents in Hazel Grove deserve better. And I shall resist the urge to lose my temper, Mr. Speaker, because these exchanges, tempting though it may be, these exchanges deserve a greater elevation of tone. But I say this, the definition of insanity is to continue to do the same thing over and over again in the hope that it will turn good. Now, we have had 3 months of interventions in Greater Manchester, which have yielded very little results indeed. I cannot but help but fear that the medicine is worse than the disease.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, we are starting to see some of the local action that we've already taken just starting potentially to work. And we have seen in Bolton that the cases were shooting up before we took action and then levelled off. So there is evidence of this approach working. And I look forward to working with my honourable friend and working with him to make sure we can get out of these measures, which I appreciate he's unenthusiastic about, as soon as possible.
We're heading up to Manchester for our final question with Lucy Powell. Lucy Powell.
Thank you for squeezing me in, Mr. Speaker. Can I just say it wasn't just the Mayor, but it was all the leaders and most of the MPs across Greater Manchester. We are a city united this evening. But shouldn't any economic support package be based on need, not some unpublished arbitrary formula that no one's got any idea what it consists of? Because if it was based on need, it would take account of the fact that business density and the economy of Greater Manchester is bigger than in other areas, and that we have many more low-paid workers. That's something he should know if he's talking about fairness. So businesses in Manchester will actually receive a lot less than businesses elsewhere. And can I tell him tonight that his government has really misjudged the mood up here, and any less than is needed coming immediately to Greater Manchester for these new restrictions would rightly be seen as spiteful and political and nothing whatsoever to do with public health?
Well, I think it benefits all of us to rise above the politics and try to work together. And as I say, the offer that was made remains on the table, and I look forward to working with the Honourable Lady, who I know works with the best, as my old friend said over here, works with the best of intentions. And I hope that we can work together to try to tackle this dreadful disease.
Right, for those who wish to leave the chamber, please do so before I start putting the next motions. Okay, folks. Sure. Yeah. Right, we're now going to come to the motions 4 to 7. I'm going to take them individually. So I'm going to start with motion number 4, Minister to move.
I beg to move.
Objection taken. The division will be deferred tomorrow. We come to motion number 5, Public Health.
I beg to move.
Objection taken. The division is deferred till tomorrow. We now come to motion number 6, Public Health. Minister.
I beg to move.
Objection taken. The division is deferred until tomorrow. We come to 7, Community Infrastructure Law.
I beg to move. Object.
Objection taken. And objection taken. The division is deferred till tomorrow. We now come to motion number 9 on the General Synod Remote Readings Temporary Standing Orders measure. Andrew Salou to move.
I beg to move.
Oh, well, we managed to get one through. Well done. Congratulations. Accepted. We now come to the presentation of petitions, and I start with Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since 2015, at least once every year to 18 months, a bank is closed in Glasgow North. And although this closure in today's petition is just over the boundary in the constituency of my honourable friend from Glasgow North West, it serves a wide area across Partick, the West End and beyond. And its closure is just another nail in the coffin of high streets and community shopping and services. It's another example of banks making claims about footfall and usage that simply don't seem to match the experience of anyone who actually visits or uses the branch. Banks of all brands must do better. We need imagination and commitment to communities so that the most disadvantaged are not further penalised by lack of access to basic services. So the petition of residents of Glasgow North declares that the proposed closure of the Partick branch of the TSB Bank in Glasgow will have a detrimental effect on local communities and the local economy, and the petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urges Her Majesty's Treasury, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and TSB Bank to take account of the concerns of the petitioners and take whatever steps they can to halt the planned closure of this branch and the petitioners remain, etc.
Petition, closure of Partick branch of TSB Bank in Glasgow.
Now come to petition from Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The closure of 3 TSB branches in my constituency of Glasgow North West will be devastating both for local constituents and for businesses. Both Partick and Anniesland serve vast areas, but due to good public transport links, they can be accessed by those whose own local branches have already closed. In Drumchapel, an area with high digital exclusion and poor transport connectivity, the TSB is the only bank for miles around and is regularly queued out the door. The petition of residents of Glasgow North West declares that the proposed closure of the Anniesland, Drumchapel and Partick branches of the TSB Bank in Glasgow will have a detrimental effect on local communities and the local economy. The petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urges Her Majesty's Treasury, the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy and TSB Bank to take into account the concerns of petitioners and take whatever steps they can to halt the planned closure of these branches, and the petitioners remain.
Petition, closure of Partick branch of TSB Bank in Glasgow.
We now come to petition Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the unfortunately too many of my constituents who rely on universal credit. It's a fact that Tory welfare policies are plunging people into poverty, but child poverty is a scourge of society. Hungry children find it harder to learn, and the reality is their life chances are disadvantaged right from the outset. Now, in Scotland, the Scottish Government has mitigated the worst effects of the poverty and we've got the lowest child poverty rates in the UK, but more is needed from the UK Government. And to that, at least the £20 universal credit top-up has been a lifeline for some during COVID. So, Mr. Speaker, the petitioners therefore request that the House of Commons urge the Government to immediately bring forward additional measures to permanently increase universal credit in response to the long-term impact of COVID-19, and the petitioners remain, etc.
Petition, universal credit uplift.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is, this House do now adjourn. Siobhan MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the other members here this evening. In just 36 hours, schools will be legally required to provide online lessons to all pupils self-isolating due to coronavirus. In theory, a sensible suggestion ensuring that no parent has to choose between the health and education of their child. But in practice, and in the shadow of the digital divide, it's the latest of the Department for Education's ill-thought-through pandemic proposals pushing the patience of our hard-working teachers to their limits. In my speech, I will reveal the horrifying extent of the digital divide across our country. I will consider the practical constraints that need to be urgently overcome for teachers to provide online learning, and I will offer a solution to the Minister following the Government's woefully inadequate in advance of these new requirements. But first, lockdown. Because my own journey into the digital divide started back in March following a conversation with Debbie, an amazing health visitor in my constituency, who had just visited temporary accommodation to 86 homeless families, lockdown would present challenges for all of us. But spare a thought for these families in cramped rooms with no outside space and, as Debbie pointed out to me, no internet connection. It's indisputable how vital the internet has been for us all in this time, unlocking the chance to remain in contact with loved ones, to take part in online exercise classes, and to work and learn from home despite the closure of offices and schools. But this lifeline was not available to all. The lockdown exposed the digital divide across the UK, with 11% of the population without home internet access and an estimated 9% of children without access to a laptop, desktop or tablet. Ofcom estimate the numbers to be up to an extraordinary 1.78 million children in the UK. So whilst the government promoted their investment in the online Oak Academy, let us be clear that no number of online lessons could benefit those children unable to log in from home. This was not the fault of their schools. The pandemic presented the most testing environment to teach in, and I've lost count of the extraordinary examples of teachers going above and beyond for their pupils. The dedication should be celebrated and shouted from the rooftops. And some schools, like the outstanding Ursuline High School attended by many of my constituents, even showed that they were already at the forefront of technology, with every pupil given a tablet and receiving 6 lessons a day from home. Mr. Speaker, if they weren't logged in by 9 a.m, the school was on to the parents right away, of course.
Can I thank the Honourable Lady from Mitcham and Morton for bringing this forward. Education, as the Honourable Lady is saying, is so important, and I'm very pleased to see the Minister in his place, and we'll be looking for exceptional response from you, Minister, by the way. But just to say this, does the Honourable Member not agree that, especially with children facing exams after losing months this year, that it's vital they have access to learning at home and put into isolation, and that every hour of teaching is necessary, and further, that it is imperative that government should make additional resources available to help staff also remotely teach as needed?
I completely agree with the Honourable Member, and I'm not sure if he's aware that a quarter of children on free school meals did less than 1 hour's schoolwork a day during lockdown, whilst staggering data from the Children's Commission indicates that over 58% of primary and just under half of secondary school pupils were being provided no online lessons whatsoever. There can be no doubt those children who couldn't access the same resources as their classmates will have returned to school even further behind. It is fundamental that they catch up. Of course, those of us who recognise the problem did not idly stand by. Whilst the government struggled to source and distribute data and devices, extraordinarily charitable efforts within so many of our constituents secured laptops, tablets and SIM cards to ensure that children had the chance to stay connected. I am personally grateful to Leica Mobile, Email, 3, Craig Russell and all at Tesco Mobile, my local Aberdeen Muslim community and the simply brilliant Don's Local Action Group for their extraordinary generosity in providing hundreds of devices and data to children in my constituency. I commend the impressive pledges made by BT and 3 to keep many of the most vulnerable families connected. And I know that my honourable friend for Wolverhampton South East is particularly grateful to an extraordinary councillor in his borough, Councillor Beverly Moman Bardi, for her tireless work in securing devices for her residents.
Can I thank my honourable friend for her amazing work on this most crucial of issues, and join her in praising the excellent work of Councillor Beverly Moman Abadi, who is the City Innovation Digital Champion for Wolverhampton. Her survey of pupils and schools has shown that at 5 primary schools in the city, over half the pupils have no access to a Wi-Fi connection at home, and pupils at many more schools lack a suitable device with which to study online. Does my honourable friend agree that with about 400,000 pupils being sent home because a COVID case has been identified in their school, it is essential to ensure that children have access both to a Wi-Fi connection as well as the laptops and other hardware they need in order to stop this situation exacerbating educational inequality that already exists.
I completely agree with my right honourable friend, and I would like to thank all those charitable efforts during lockdown. But it cannot be right that educational opportunity for our children during lockdown was dependent on a lottery of charitable giving. Mr. Speaker, this is not just an issue of access, it is an issue of deprivation, and it should be right at the top of the government's levelling up agenda. Because data from the ONS reveals that only 51% of households earning between £6,000 and £10,000 have internet access, compared with 99% of households earning over £40,000. Whilst 30.7% of private school pupils attended 4 or more online lessons per day, only 6.3% of state school pupils did the same. And however damning the statistics sound, don't be misled. Being connected is one thing, but more than 880,000 children live in households with only one mobile internet connection. I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but Mum's mobile doesn't strike me as an acceptable solution to logging in and learning from home. No wonder the Oak Academy data shows that pupils were accessing lessons through games consoles, mobile phones, old tablets. But for those families using pay-as-you-go streaming online lessons cost an astronomical £37 a day, another ill-thought-through policy hitting the poorest hardest. No one should underestimate the digitally connected world we now live in and assume that this is a short-term problem. Secondary school pupils spend on average 1 hour and 37 minutes a week on schoolwork through the internet, every click widening the digital divide in our society. Before lockdown, children on free school meals were leaving school 18 months behind their classmates, and the gap was getting worse. The digital divide will manifest itself by giving those from the wealthiest background an advantage over the other children. We can't let coronavirus make our society even more unequal and unfair, whatever happened to levelling up. But this isn't just a manifesto commitment. In just 36 hours, the digital divide changes from a political debate to a legal requirement, with schools obliged to provide online lessons to the increasing numbers of children self-isolating at home. I anticipate that the Minister will celebrate from the dispatch box the small number of devices already distributed by the government. But however you look at it, the numbers simply don't add up. There were 540,000 children eligible under the government's initial scheme to provide devices to disadvantaged learners, but only 200,000 devices and 50,000 routers to give away. The whole system was chaotic and ad hoc, with some children receiving devices regardless of whether they already had one, and others not arriving till July, too late for term time and months into the world of remote education. Staggeringly, even now, 7 months after schools closed and the government support package for remote education still has a large section entitled Remote Education Support, Available Soon. Teachers are sick and tired of information leaks before midnight, document updates and vague press release. The message being conveyed to schools is that they are accountable from Thursday and will face consequences if remote education is not in place. But, Mr. Speaker, how can the department expect schools to be ready to provide remote education if they themselves are not? More devices have finally been pledged, but the numbers still fall far short of the need. Where is the drive or the ambition? I quote directly from the head teacher of an Ofsted outstanding school in my constituency. She says, "Today in school, the leadership team has been trying to work out exactly how to address the legislative changes when around 1/3 of pupils do not have devices. Frankly, we don't know what to do. And importantly, the government do not seem to recognise that a device is only as effective as the internet connection it's used with. No matter how expensive, how smart, how modern the device distributed is, it is rendered useless if it comes without the data or dongle needed to link in from home. Why hadn't the department engaged with all the mobile virtual network operators? After all, the families on the lowest incomes are unlikely to have contracts with the bigger providers. Meanwhile, the Alliance for Inclusive Education note that there is nothing in the guidance about the provision of adaptive and assistive technologies. But with the clock ticking, 4 of my local schools contacted me urgently this morning. The first has 79 pupils unable to access remote learning online. The second has 60 students that still need to access their own devices, and that doesn't take into account those who share devices with siblings. The third has an extraordinary 31% of Key Stage 2 pupils with just a mobile connection or no internet at all. And the fourth has had a coronavirus outbreak, but laptops ordered from the Department for Education have no time frame for delivery, and 15% of children are yet to log in from home. Please can the Minister clearly in his response tell me when will St Thomas of Canterbury get its 47 devices? Because whilst the government points to the COVID-funded provider to support schools from the emergency devices can be purchased, there's no spare change once cleaning supplies, new desks, sinks, chairs, fencing, signage, red tape, face masks, thermometers, aprons, gloves and more have all been purchased. And so I ask the Minister, whose responsibility is it to ensure that these children have the data and devices required? Teachers need to know tonight, because many of them are understandably at the end of their tether. I quote one directly. What was the Department for Education's biggest failure during lockdown? Not providing schools with the resources or funding to ensure every child who did not have access to the internet or suitable devices for remote learning would receive one. With the best will in the world, this was a short turnaround. We all understand that it could not be achieved overnight, but it's worth noting that schools were expected to move mountains overnight. The department required them to do so. Another teacher told me she's already working through her breaks and bringing masses of work home. She asked if the Minister can clarify how she is expected to mark home learning, how she can give constructive feedback to isolated pupils, and when in the school day she is to provide the full day of extra lessons. The language used by a third teacher was a bit less parliamentary. When on earth in our working hours are we doing this is perhaps a translation. And we must not underestimate the practical difficulties facing school. How does a teacher simultaneously teach half their class in person and half online? For the younger primary pupils, how can they be expected to sit attentively in front of a screen throughout the whole day? And what about the arts, music or drama? Are these subjects to be sacrificed in the online world? Add in a crashed computer or broken microphone and the barriers facing classrooms are clear. What's more, no one should underestimate the importance of child protection issues. Teachers have told me horror stories this week of children taking the iPad to the toilet and of mum swearing in front of a class of horrified primary students. I wholeheartedly appreciate the importance of ensuring that no child falls even further behind their education, and I'm confident that the practical difficulties outlined can be overcome. But the government cannot just pin the obligations on schools without giving them every ounce of support and guidance that they need. In the statistics I shared this evening, we can be in no doubt that without urgent support, the online lesson requirement will fail those children on the wrong side of the digital divide. But the government knew this was coming and they were too slow to act. Back in June, I shared a cross-party warning directly with the Secretary of State, calling for all children entitled to free school meals to have internet access and adequate device at home. Not just my view, but the view of 4 former education secretaries, 4 former children's ministers, the former head of Ofsted, the Labour Shadow Education Secretary, the Conservative Chair of the Education Select Committee, the Liberal Democrat education spokesman, the chairs of the APPGs for Children, Education, Social Mobility and Digital Skills, a whole number of children's charities, unions, think tanks, MPs, academics, and even my favourite former Prime Minister. I am now looking to ensure the backing of a wonderful young Premier League striker from Manchester. Because digital exclusion is not an issue which directly resulted from the pandemic, and nor will it subside with it. The importance of closing the digital divide extends far beyond the classroom, but coronavirus has shone a light on this inequality, highlighting the critical role that adequate access to safe, high-quality online learning resources at home plays in children's lives. Without supporting schools with the means to adhere to this new legal requirement, these educational inequalities will only be exacerbated. That can simply not be right, because surely no matter what corner of this chamber we sit in, we can all agree that no child's education should be dependent on their internet connection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I start by congratulating the Honourable Lady, the member for Mitcham and Morden, on securing this debate. Ensuring children continue to receive their education during this pandemic is critical to ensure this generation of school children reach their potential, as well as to prevent a widening of the attainment gap, something I share the same objective as the Honourable Member. It is thanks to the outstanding efforts of our teachers and staff that pupils are continuing to receive the education and opportunities they deserve in the face of the pandemic. Now, we recognise that all children and young people have had their education disrupted as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. The Department is committed to the continuation of high-quality education for all pupils during this period. Now, we know that schools and colleges worked extremely hard over the summer to prepare for full reopening, as well as to develop remote education contingency plans. And this is testament to their commitment to ensuring that any missed education is recovered and that we prevent the attainment gap from widening further. And we have a shared responsibility for working to ensure that this generation of young people do not face long-term disadvantage. Now, the government was clear that pupils in all year groups and from all types of school should return to school full-time from the beginning of the autumn term. And figures show that as at the 15th of October, 99.7% of schools were open. Over 7 million children and young people are back in school, representing 89% of pupils across the country. And we are continuing to do everything in our power to ensure that every child can continue to attend school safely, as this is the best place for them to be for their education, for their development and for their well-being. Now, the Department works closely with other public health bodies to monitor the rate and transmission of the virus. On the 15th of October, approximately 0.1% of pupils in state schools were self-isolating because they had tested positive for the coronavirus. 0.5% were self-isolating with a suspected case of coronavirus, and between 3.9% and 4.3% of pupils were self-isolating because they had been in contact with a potential case. Now, we recognise that for some pupils, remote education may need to be an essential component alongside classroom teaching. And in these circumstances, the government wants to ensure that there is no doubt about the roles and responsibility within the system for providing that remote education. And that is why the Secretary of State issued a temporary continuity direction on the 1st of October to give clarity that schools have a duty to provide remote education for state-funded school-aged children who are unable to attend school due to the coronavirus pandemic, in line with guidance and the law. Now, these link to the remote education expectations that the Department published for schools on the 2nd of July. They say that the direction says that schools have to have regard to that guidance, and that guidance has been available to schools since the 2nd of July, and it sets out very clearly the expectations that we have for the quality and breadth of remote education. Now, Mr. Speaker, ensuring schools can provide a high quality of remote education was and continues to be a key part of our work to support schools. So alongside the direction, the Department also announced further remote educational support intended to help schools and colleges in meeting the remote education expectations. And the support package is available over the coming months, and parts of it are available now, I should say to the Honourable Lady, to support schools and colleges seeking additional support, which can be found on the Get Help with Remote Education page on gov.uk. Now, we have invested over £160 million to support remote education. And as part of this, during the summer term, we delivered over 220,000 laptops and tablets for disadvantaged children who would not otherwise have access to the internet. It was one of the largest procurements of computers in the UK. And on one particular day, 27,000 computers were being delivered on a single day. Now, we are now supplementing this support, Mr. Speaker, by making available 250,000 additional laptops and tablets for disadvantaged children in years 3 to 11 in the event that face-to-face schooling is disrupted this term as a result of the pandemic. By the end of this week, Mr. Speaker, we will have delivered, since the beginning of term, 100,000 of that 250,000 computers to schools. Now, the Honourable Lady referred to St Thomas of Canterbury Primary School, and she sent me a letter today. And we did check the status of the school's order with my officials as a consequence of the Honourable Member sending me that letter. So St Thomas of Canterbury's Primary School's order of 47 laptops, according to my officials, was received on Friday, the 16th of October, and we expect the laptops will be dispatched to them tomorrow. So the Honourable Member has achieved some piece of information by orchestrating this debate this evening. Now, we are also working with the major telecoms companies to improve internet connectivity for disadvantaged and vulnerable families. The Department is piloting an approach where for families who rely on a mobile internet connection, mobile network operators will provide temporary access to free additional data, offering them more flexibility to access the resources that they need the most. I have to give way to the Honourable Member.
What is becoming increasingly, I'm becoming increasingly aware of, is we know that being poor means you pay your bills differently, whether it's electricity meters or gas meters. Pay-as-you-go mobiles from not the mainstream mobile providers, by GiftGo, by Leica Mobile, by all those, are how they get their data. Can I ask the Minister what he's doing about those sorts of areas?
With her permission, I will write to the Honourable Member about that so that I get the facts absolutely right. We are very concerned about these issues, and that's why we have provided over 50,000 4G routers to homes and those other support that I have referred to. But I will write specifically on the point she raises to her. Now, we are funding expert technical support and training to help schools as well. To help set up Google or Microsoft digital education platforms. Now, schools can also access guidance and training from a network of schools and colleges across the country who are leading their way in the use of digital. And these are our EdTech demonstrator schools. A library of resources and materials has been produced by these demonstrator schools to support remote education arrangements, including support for schools who are less digitally able, alongside guidance on how to make use of DFE-funded digital platforms and devices. Now, the programme is proving popular, with well over 1,000 schools and colleges receiving weekly tailored support and over 5,000 schools and colleges attending live-streamed webinars. To support the hard work of schools in delivering remote education, Oak National Academy, referred to by the Honourable Member, was very quickly brought together, I think within 2 weeks of the pandemic leading to schools closing, by over 40 teachers. Their schools and other education organisations also helped them. Now, the Department has made £4.84 million available for Oak National Academy, both for the summer term of last academic year and then for this 2020-21 academic year, to provide video lessons for a broad range of subjects for reception to Year 11. And Oak will remain a free optional resource for 2020-21. And since the start of the autumn term, 500,000 users have visited the Oak National Academy platform and 3.1 million lessons. So, Mr. Speaker, the government is clear that the best place for children is in school, where they can be with their friends and teachers and can catch up with the education that they may have lost when schools closed to most pupils. But ensuring that that education can continue when schools are required to send children and young people home to self-isolate because of a confirmed case of coronavirus is also vital. And we are providing the support and the devices for the most disadvantaged, and we are providing £1 billion of catch-up funding to ensure that the current generation of school students do not have their long-term prospects damaged by this appalling pandemic that the world is confronting.
The question is, this House to now adjourn. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order.